This whole subject fascinates me. In the Natural History Museum, I took this photograph. Most of these photographs were taken with my own camera in the museum. There is a 4-foot-high chimpanzee-looking creature. The creature that you see on the right was built based upon the bones you see on the left. That's all they had to go on to build the creature on the right. This is an Australopithecine, a southern ape. This particular one was called Lucy because when it was found by Donald Johanson in 1974, the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was playing on the radio, so they decided they'd call it Lucy. Now, I'm particularly interested in this one because I believe it is a complete fraud. If you look at Lucy, you'll see a sort of interesting, thoughtful look on her face. You'll see the completely human hands that she has. Now, notice they've given her completely human hands. But notice here, there are no bones for the human hands. They've given her, you can't see it so well on the screen, but that's completely human-looking feet, based on nothing. So they gave her completely human feet, completely human hands, without a bone to go on. I wrote a letter to the head of the department there in the Natural History Museum and questioned him about that, because to me that's a very misleading exhibit. As you go around, you find other misleading-looking photographs. This is another photograph from the Natural History Museum. Here they've drawn these creatures, half human, half chimpanzee. Reminded me very much of the picture that was put into the London Illustrated News in 1922. Somebody was in Nebraska one day and they dug up this tooth. And Sir Grafton Elliot Smith, a distinguished English anatomist, he commissioned a painting which was given a 2-page spread in the London Illustrated News. You know, you can imagine him going to these people and saying, can you draw the creature that this tooth used to come from? And the man said, yeah, I'll draw his wife as well while I'm at it. And so he draws Mr. and Mrs. Nebraska man. You know, they went back, I think it was 5 years later, was it? Yes, 5 years later, and they found the rest of the animal. Turned out it was an extinct pig. Well, it wasn't an ape, wasn't a man, it was an extinct pig. That's a case of a pig making a monkey out of an evolutionist. But let's go back to Lucy. What are the similar features between Lucy and man? Well, the shape of the jaw is somewhat similar. But that wouldn't be conclusive proof because there's a wide range of shapes of jaws in humans and chimps. The size of the teeth was somewhat similar, but again that wouldn't be conclusive because there are various types of apes that have similar teeth to humans. The biggest play that they gave was on the femur. You'll notice the angle is coming in. Normally an ape, their legs go straight down, and when they walk, they have to walk from side to side, otherwise they'd fall over. We don't have to do that because we've got an angle, about 9 degrees going in. So when I lift this foot up, I can still stand up because my center of gravity is almost directly under my body. And so they said that Lucy had a 15-degree angle, and therefore she was on the way to walking on 2 feet. Well, there are several problems with that. Although gorillas and chimps have straight legs, orangutans and spider monkeys have very similar carrying angles to Lucy. And yet they just climb trees and they don't walk upright all the time. They can walk upright, but they are not bipedal in that sense. But let's go back to these hands. I wrote to Professor Chris Stringer. He's the head of human origins at the London History Museum. And I said, excuse me, how can you dare to put human hands and human feet on this creature when you don't have a bone to go on? And he wrote back and said, I wasn't here when Lucy was made. That was 25 years ago. Then he sent me along to look at some journals. It actually has turned out that there are several other Australopithecine skeletons throughout the world, and some of them do have hands and some of them do have feet, and they find out that they are long and curved just like apes and gorillas would be expected to be. Their wrists are capable of locking, so they are knuckle walkers. They have different shaped ribs, a different shaped ridge cage, and their skulls are typically ape-like. Charles Oxnard, who Stephen Jay Gould called our leading expert on the qualitative study of skeletons, declared the Australopithecines are now irrevocably removed from a place in the evolution of human bipedalism, and certainly from any place in the direct human lineage. And so what about all the other ones? Well, before we get to all the other ones, I read a book recently called The Origin of Man by Stuart Burgess. Very, very interesting book. He's the head of the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Bristol University. A very, very clever designer. And he goes through the differences between ape and man in relation to upright walking. And he says you need a lot more than just an angled femur to walk upright. In fact, he says there are 10 different features that you need for upright walking, including upright hip joints, a straight back, flat face, upright knee joints, long legged, arched feet, and so on and so forth. And he says in every one of these, Lucy completely fails. But you say, what about all the other ones? What about Homo erectus and Neandertal man and habilis and all the rest of them? What about them? Well, let's ask an expert. Let's ask the chief science writer of Nature magazine, Henry G. This is what he said in 1999. He said that the conventional picture of human evolution as lines of ancestry and descent is, quote, a completely human invention created after the fact and shaped to accord with human prejudices. In other words, when you see that row of nicely sequenced apes going up and finally reaching man, that's a fiction. He further stated, quote, to take a line of fossils and claim that they represent a lineage is not a scientific hypothesis that can be tested, but an assertion that carried the same validity as a bedtime story. Amusing, perhaps even instructive, but not scientific. I even read a shocking quote in the National Geographic, not known for its anti-evolutionary views. Just recently, July 12, 2001, the world of paleanthropology, in other words, finding the origins of man, is highly contentious, and scientists have been trying for many decades to sort out the murky ancestry of today's human race by comparing thousands of fossil bones and skulls. But no evidence is certain and no lineages are clear. But you see, the average person in the street thinks it's all settled. But it's not. Behind closed doors, the theory is in crisis because the proofs don't stack up. It's no wonder that the Professor Simon Conway Morris, a paleontologist from Cambridge University, said, when discussing organic evolution, the only point of agreement seems to be, it happened. Thereafter, there is little consensus. Mutations cannot account for all of life because they are far too infrequent. They never result in a gain of genetic information. They are often balanced out in reproduction, and they are almost always harmful. Hemophilia, sickle cell anemia, muscular dystrophy, cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome, 4,000 other diseases and illnesses are a result of mutation. It's not a world-building engine. It's a very destructive system. In fact, the genetic system's prime function seems to be to resist change. So mutations is a huge problem, not a plus. Plus, there are limits on mutation. Second problem is the limit. There was an evolutionist once called Richard Goldschmidt, an eminent geneticist. He bred gypsy moths for 20 years and 1 million generations. All he got was gypsy moths. Nothing more, nothing less. Famed American plant breeder Luther Burbank said he could breed a plum from 1/2 inch to 2.5 inches long. But it was impossible genetically to go as small as a pea or as big as a grapefruit. In other words, there are limits to what you can do with mutations. Professor Lane Lester and Raymond Bolin, in their book, Natural Limits to Biological Change, said this, quote, natural selection, recombination, mutation, and speciation can all interact in concert to bring about startling variation, but there are limits to biological change. There are certain walls that mutations cannot jump. Natural selection also has limits. What can natural selection explain? It can explain a lot of things. It can explain different beak sizes. It can explain wingless insects, sightless fish, flightless birds. But it cannot build complex structures in the first place. It can hone existing structures, but it cannot build complex structures.